Vegan encounters meat eater between the sheets. There's a small town in the north of England, south of Manchester in fact. Curious place, not too big, but historically quite an important small town. It's set amongst the Derbyshire Hills. I'm not going to mention the name of the place, but anyway, it's there. Interesting so far as all kinds of people who in the music business, musicians, very often rock musicians, and artistic people of various kinds, excuse me, they decided to move there because there was an abundance of old properties buried away in the various folds in the hillsides. Some very nice historic stuff, really quite early, 17th, 18th century, which at the time really didn't cost a lot of money. And so there was a kind of sub-community of these people. And in a cultural sense, this small town really punched above its weight. I had two friends there, one in particular, I've forgotten his name for a moment, David. David lived with Rachel. David, in fact, was a very good jazz musician, very good, a bit of a promoter, also had a small business. And his partner was a lady called Rachel, who was a very upfront young woman, very ebullient indeed. One of the interesting things about Rachel was that she was a firm believer in free love. This at the time was a rather discreet pursuit. I know in recent years people are much more open about these things, but certainly then, though I'm sure there were quite a lot of people, in fact, who believed in free love, but it was done. It wasn't generally accepted or even known about by many of the normal population. Anyway. He had a small business, David, a small business holder, apart from his musical activities. But the situation was this, that it really wasn't out of the ordinary for him to come home from doing a late gig or work or whatever and find that his place on his side of the bed was occupied by another gentleman. And he would actually head downstairs and go to sleep on the sofa. And I don't know, it seemed to work, or I don't know what the level of stresses which were involved, but that was the situation. Anyway, Andrew, who was also a very good friend of David, and also somebody that I went back a long, long way. He was also a musician and a journalist and writer, and was paying a visit to the north of England for various reasons. And was going to stay the night over at Rachel's and David's. David and Andrew, they went out onto the town, onto the small town, which had a surprising ambience. In fact, there was a very, very good and very strong R&B scene there, amongst other things. So that there was no lack of entertainment, and I presume, wandered the night and drank numerous pints of beer. And at some point had fish and chips, which had to be done somewhat surreptitiously because in these parts fish and chips were cooked in beef dripping, something of course which Rachel would totally abhor, so they really had to plan not breathing on her in case she detected this infringement, as it were. Anyway, at some point later in the evening, quite late, they arrived back. In fact, he lived over at the shop. In fact, he ran a small business. They arrived back home and avoided the detection as far as the fish and chips were concerned. A few more drinks, more chat, etc., and eventually went to bed. Sometime in the night, Andrew woke up, something he normally did, and became aware of the fact that standing by his bed was a lady. No, it was Rachel, in fact, no doubt about it. Minus clothes. Rachel peers down at him and looks him in the face and says, "And now show me how a meat eater makes love." And without another word, slips in between the sheets. In fact, the expression she used, in fact, was rather more earthy and rather more Anglo-Saxon, but the intent and the meaning was unmistakable. At this point, of course, the necessary asterisks appear in a row, and we draw a curtain on what went on after from this point onwards. Andrew woke up in the morning and goes down to breakfast. Of course, it's a vegan household, so the breakfast consists of a vegan diet with melon seeds and various nuts and almond milk, and you know perfectly well the kind of diet that vegans prefer. Andrew was kind of a bit nonplussed by all this and looks back at Rachel and said, this is not really the usual kind of breakfast I eat. I normally have eggs and ham and bacon and toast and butter, etc., etc. Rachel looks at him rather in a kind of quizzical manner across the table and remarks straight into his face, "It doesn't do you much good, does it?" A killer response, as it were. I've always thought about this. I thought about this later, and it's rather curious. Andrew was the kind of archetypal alpha male, always right about everything, totally opinionated, and not really the kind of person who would actually tell tales against himself, as it were. But the one thing he lacked was a sense of humour. In fact, I don't think he had much sense of humour at all, quite frankly. And I don't know, I've noticed before that actually people who lack a sense of humour, in fact, sometimes really do not see the underlying story, as it were, the story underlining the main line of the story. But there we are. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please subscribe.